Yes, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to PFL CEO John Martin. John, fantastic to see you. It's a new era for the PFL, some exciting shows coming up. What excites you most about this new era?
Well, thanks for having me. It's nice to see you. I mean, look, we're off to a really good start this year in 2026, and this is a year where we changed formats of our events, and we moved away from what was previously a world tournament, and we're really having the best fight the best. And I've been very, very excited about the events we've had thus far this year, but we're moving into what I think is the most exciting part of the year, which is summer, where, beginning on May 23rd, a week from this weekend, we'll be in Brussels, and then we'll be in the US for a number of events, consecutively. Busy summer. We'll be crowning new champions, and we'll be watching a number of fighters who have stood at the top of the heap for a long time defend their legacy against new and rising and upcoming stars. So we're going to have put on fights that have real consequence and implications and real stakes, and hopefully be looking at some new stars here.
Have you got a fight of the year candidate coming up?
We've got, I don't even know how to list just one. We've got so many. I mean, let's start in Brussels on May 23rd. When I first showed up at the PFL, people were talking about Patrick Harbororo, and people were talking about him as someone to keep an eye on. And then I watched him fight live in Lyon in December of last year, and I said to myself, this isn't a fighter to keep an eye on. This is a fighter who is knocking at the door and wants to be let in for a championship fight. Patrick is an exciting fighter, and he's got a maturity for a relatively a young person early in his career, and he had an electric knockout, and every fight he's had, he's been able to finish in some sort of a really, really devastating way. And so very, very much looking forward to see Patrick fighting. But, this is a matchup where you have proven versus prospect. So I'll call Patrick a prospect for a moment. But the proven is Benson Henderson. And for those people who have been following MMA for a long time, Benson he does represent legacy. I mean, he's fought the best of the best. He's a former champion, and he's got something to prove. And this fight he needs to make a statement, and it's going to affect the way people remember him. And I think Benson, I was talking to somebody the other day, I said he may have forgotten more about MMA than Patrick has ever learned yet, in terms of where they are in their career. But he's a very accomplished, very crafty fighter. I think he's going to give Benson a really difficult time. And this is the biggest test for, he's going to give Patrick a really difficult time. This is the biggest test for Patrick's career. So that's an exciting fight. But we've got two other fights on Brussels that I'm on the Brussels card that I'm really excited about. We're going to be showcasing for the first time Donegi Abena, who's a Glory kickboxing champion, is going to make his debut in MMA, and want to see whether the 4-ounce gloves and the lack of structure that MMA has versus kickboxing is going to bode well for him. And that's going to be a fight against Joe Schilling that's going to just be chaos and pure violence. And then we've got Taylor Lapalus, who's off a 2-fight win streak that I've seen in the PFL, and he's fighting on the co-main event in Brussels. So that's a stacked card, but every card we've got coming up in the summer is going to be stacked. And I don't want to give it away, but we're going to have 3 weeks in a row in the summer. We're going to have 3 championship fights. So stay tuned.
There's been a lot of focus on international markets in the past couple of years, in the Middle East, in Africa as well. But how important is the US for you? Because these US shows, they seem to be some of the biggest.
Well, when I came in, you're right. And the PFL has had a lot of success in the past years internationally. Europe, notable success. And then in the Middle East as well. And even launching PFL Africa, which is the first, real development league on the continent of Africa. And have real success filling event arenas, 15,000, 17,000 people in Europe and Dubai with 10, 11,000. But the US was always smaller. And I said, if you're going to have a global promotion ambition and you want to run a global brand, which is the ambition that we have at the PFL and I have as the leader, you've got to make it in the US. And so I want to take some of the fighters that have been winning and really are being noticed internationally, and bring them to the US and introduce the US audience to them. So we've had 3 events so far. I'm happy to say ticket sales are pacing well ahead of where we were a year ago. And we've had 99% venue capacity so far. We've sold more tickets in the first 3 events in the US this year than we did compared to the first 6 events in the US a year ago. So ticket sales are way up, and our audience is up also in the US, which I'm happy to see. Our peak audience is up 37% year over year, and our main and co-main event viewing is up a third, 33% over a year ago, and that's even going against direct head-to-head against the UFC on a couple of weekends. So I think bringing the more exciting fights, the best fighting the best, to the U.S. audiences and introducing them to the elite fighters that the PFL has is really, it's the right strategy, and it's going to start to get us noticed on a much bigger level.
What's your opinion of the relationship in terms of the UFC? The UFC is the market leader. It's so established, and we're talking about billions of dollars. How do you compete with an organization like that?
Well, they are the leader, as you said, and from being in business for more than 30 years, they've established a beachhead that we're all targeting. Every other promotion that's in the business is looking to gain ground on the UFC. And before I joined, I had to convince myself that the UFC was not going to be a global monopolist in premium MMA. And I think the world is too big a place, and MMA is too popular, the 3rd largest fan base in the world, and it's underserved because there just aren't a lot of events for fans to really watch. And when I looked at the fighter roster that the PFL has, largely from the benefit of acquiring Bellator a couple of years ago, I made the conclusion that the PFL has elite fighters that can compete at the UFC level. And that's what I think we're really showcasing and demonstrating. I mean, I think a great example of this is Sean Strickland just won the middleweight championship last weekend, the UFC, and was really kind and gracious enough to call out Johnny Eblen, who's our middleweight, the PFL, fighting for the championship this summer, and said, training with Johnny Eblen, he's as good as anybody in the UFC and probably should be and could be fighting for a title championship in the UFC. We have fighters that have been in the UFC, could be in the UFC, and would do really, really well in the UFC. I think an average MMA fan doesn't appreciate that. So it's our job to showcase those fighters and get them the respect that they deserve and get the fans to engage in what are really, really exciting MMA fights right now.
That Costello Eblen fight strikes me as a real banger. Is that potentially, I asked you maybe fight of the year. Is that one you got your eye on? I can't wait for that fight.
I was going in chronological order talking about Brussels, but I got to tell you, that is a validation versus redemption. And it's a reminder, I think, to any fighter who is terrified when they're winning a fight that one mistake can really wreak havoc on an outcome. Because I watched that fight, and Eblen was winning that fight and probably was going to win a decision, and of course made a mistake and got caught and was choked out by a rear naked choke in under 10 seconds left to go in the 5th round. And Eblen was previously undefeated. It's the only loss he has in his career. And since that time, Costello has successfully defended the belt in Madrid and had a very convincing knockout stoppage of Fabian Edwards. And then Eblen, made a statement in Pittsburgh fighting ex-UFC fighter and undefeated fighter Brian Battle. And he literally tossed him around like a rag doll in the 1st round and stopped him in the 1st round. And Eblen is on a mission. He wants his belt back. And he's made that very clear. And he immediately called out Costello, and Costello was more than willing to take that fight. So that is going to be an exciting rematch. And that will happen in Austin, Texas in July of this year. I can't wait for that fight. That may be the most anticipated PFL fight right now.
Yeah, it's right up there. Eddie Hearn is called Zuffa lazy. People have said the UFC has a star problem, and with PFL making moves, MVP coming on the scene. Do you think there's a level of complacency with the UFC that perhaps the competitors can take advantage of?
Boy, I hope so. And I say that with a smile on my face because, look, it's hard for me to take shots at the UFC because they're the UFC. I think the PFL doesn't get the respect it deserves given the high quality fighters that we have. And if the UFC is complacent, boy, we are aggressively trying to gain ground on them and get some space from them. And right now, the thing that largely holds the PFL back is our brand is not that well known in the US and in some important places around the world. So we're trying to work hard to raise the brand awareness, because when people come to an event or when people watch these fights on TV, the conclusion is usually like, these are great fights. And our matchmaking has been really improved this year. And I love our matchmaking going into the summer. And so, if UFC is not promoting the way they did in the past, and if they're not really focused on building stars, who is? We are. And our job is we're working really, really hard to grow our fan base. And we got to try to bust out of the hardcore MMA fans to get to the more casual fans. And we're trying very, very hard. I mean, it's a tough business. It's a very competitive business. It's always fun to watch all the chatter back and forth between, the promoters and of course, Eddie and Dana have had their beef, and I'll be watching what MVP does very intently this weekend. But it's a fun business to be in. But I love our athletes and our roster, and I love our ability to put on great fights, and we're here to compete.
MVP is one that I mentioned. Jake Paul, I think, said that he'd be interested to see a collaboration maybe with Chris Cyborg and Gina, or Chris Cyborg and Ronda Rousey. How do you feel about that?
I didn't see that he said that. That's interesting. This is the first time hearing of it. I would never say never. They're all legends. I mean, Chris Cyborg is with the PFL, and she's always in the discussion as being the GOAT, or one of the GOATs. And she had a great stoppage for us in Lyon last year in December. And I know she's looking for another fight. And she had been calling out Dakota Ditcheva, who's on our roster. And Dakota's been sidelined due to injury for a while, but she's healed up nicely, and she'll be fighting this summer. And Dakota's 15-0 and a tournament winner. And Chris, who's naturally much bigger than Dakota, was saying she'll come down and wait. Dakota can come up and wait. And boy, wouldn't that be an amazing super fight? And I'd love to make that fight happen at some point in time. In terms of collaboration, we're being approached often, and I don't want to say all the time, but often, by other promotions about possible super fights. And I would never say never, because I'm in this business in part to try to delight the fans and give fighters opportunities to make money and showcase their skills. And if it's good for our brand and our promotion, I'd be open to anything, any types of discussions.
Dakota, is she one of your biggest success stories, do you think? What makes her such a star?
Well, she's an outstanding fighter, first and foremost. 15-0. She's been pretty proficient in her ability to convincingly beat her competitors. I think one of the reasons why I would say she is a PFL success story is because she started in a development league, and PFL saw her talents early and signed her. And then she went through the process and was winning. And then she entered the tournament and won the world tournament, which gave her a lot of I would say, exposure. And I think a lot of MMA fans see her as being, if not the most exciting female fighter in the world, at least in the conversation as one of the most exciting. And she's got a perfect 15-0 record. And unfortunately, she's had back-to-back injuries, and she's been out of the cage now for about 9 months. But we keep in touch, and I know she's knock on wood, she's healed up, and she'll be fighting soon. And it'll be really, really fascinating to see her bounce back. I can't wait to get her in the cage.
Is MMA the only focus in terms of martial arts? Are you looking at other martial arts as well?
I'd say for now, plan A is definitely MMA. But I I grew up, I was a boxing fan as a kid growing up, and I'm watching all of the changes happening in combat sports with Zuffa coming on and MVP thinking they may be able to promote MMA and boxing. And I did see Nikisa's interview with Ariel today, where he said, it might be a benefit to offer fighters the opportunity to fight in multiple disciplines and to give them a better career path and more opportunities to make money. And we had Francis Ngannou signed to the PFL for some period of time, but we allowed Francis to go off and make money in boxing. So I'm very much pro fighter. I'd love the PFL to be a place where fighters think that they get treated fairly, they get paid fairly, and we give them opportunities to grow. And I do think there's going to be a lot of interesting combat sports that may not necessarily fall along previously traditional lines, if that makes sense, whether it's crossover type fights, whether there's eventually, who knows, there could be a PFL stand-up opportunity, or there's so many. I mean, fighting is primal. You can make up any number of ways that you can pit two opponents against each other and create a set of rules. So I would never say never, but for now, at this moment, we're trying to establish ourselves and elevate ourselves as a premium mixed martial arts league. And that's really where our primary focus is at the moment.
Fighter pay is a constant topic in MMA. You spoke about the UFC being around for 30 plus years, just did a $7 billion deal with Paramount. But how difficult is it to make money in this industry when you're not the UFC and also pay your fighters? How much of a juggling act is that?
Well, it's a bit of a juggling act. It's really about making sure that, again, if you're lucky enough, like the PFL is, to have a high quality fighter roster, and I think, without being overly immodest for a moment, I think it's pretty fair to say the PFL has the second highest quality fighter roster in the world behind the UFC. So if we can delight fans, and if we can engage fans, and if the fans love our product, then we ought to get paid for that. And we can make money by getting paid by media platforms. We have 26 arrangements with platforms today around the world. We can be seen in 170 countries. And we make money by sponsorship and commercial arrangements. We make money by selling tickets. There's ancillary revenues. There's licensing and merchandising. There's selling catalog. There's all these different ways. If you've got a great product, I think we ought to be able to earn enough revenues that we ought to be able to pay fighters adequately and earn an adequate return. And that's really the goal. And we have to compete at the PFL because we're competing in the most premium elite MMA category. We're competing with the UFC. We have to be able to pay competitively. And so that is what we're doing.
Bellator enjoyed a long-standing collaboration with Rizin. Some banger events were put on. Where does that stand at the moment, that relationship?
I get asked that question quite a bit. I've spoken to Saki Kabara-san a number of times. I have a lot of respect for him. I'm paying close attention to what Rizin's doing. It's a very exciting promotion. We have our head of fighter operations, Mike Hogan, was at Bellator, came from Bellator, and has known Saki Kabara-san for over 20 years. And we've talked about the idea of fighter sharing or co-promoting events. And in fact, we are doing some limited fighter sharing now. There's a Rizin fighter. I can't remember which card upcoming he's going to be on, but he'll be on a card over the summer. And I'm open to it where it makes sense for our promotion. And I'm open to the idea of co-promoting an event as well. There used to be, back in the day at Bellator, there used to be a New Year's Eve event that became almost, you put it in the calendar and you knew as a fan that was going to happen. So I would say, we're a challenger brand. We're not the number one. So I think we have to be a little bit more forward leaning in terms of what we might be willing to do to showcase our brand and our fighters. So I respect what they're doing in Japan, and it's got such a long history of excellence in fighting. And I know he's interested in getting his fighters some more exposure to the United States, which we can offer and provide. So where it makes sense, again, I would never say never to anything.
Are there any other markets that excite you? I'm speaking to you from Southeast Asia. There's Australia. Is there anywhere you're looking to go in the future?
The market that has been, and I know the PFL had made announcements in the past, and we've been slow to move there in earnest, but we've signed some interesting Australian fighters, and it's a big market. It's a mature MMA market in the sense of not mature as in bad, it's mature as in good. And UFC's been going there, and UFC's put some what I think are average cards on in Australia. I think we have some fighters that could really go down there and delight that audience, Australia, New Zealand. And so I would love to be able to bring a great event and a great card down there. That would be a good achievement, I think, for our promotion. And I'm very, very interested in exploring that. We've put on multiple successful events in Dubai, and Dubai's become almost a little bit of a home for the PFL, and I'm interested in continuing that relationship, which I think is working for them and working for us. We call it a partnership. We're having some success in Africa, the continent of Africa. We have PFL Africa, which we just had our successful first event there. We'll do 3 more on the continent this year. It's a development league, but it's gotten off to a great success. Africa's a big land mass. So when you think about doing 4 events a year, it's hard to really put a dent in what the demand is there. But I think there's a tremendous demand there, and there's a lot of excitement. And, I would love to explore India and the opportunity. I've got a lot of incoming interest into me from people in India who would love to host. And we've had interesting discussions about bringing an event to Macau and other areas in and around that area. So, and we've had some interesting discussions in Mexico City and Russia, and there's demand all over the world. The world is a very, very big place. So for an organization like ours, we're putting a lot of emphasis in the moment in the US to try to build up our brand. But I think there's lots of opportunity for us to go to many, many places in the world. We've got fighters that represent more than 40 countries on our roster. And so I think we could put together some really interesting cards that have showcase some local fighters and then showcase our global superstars.
This sport is unique. It's unlike any other in the sense that it is a sport, but it's also entertainment. It's the fight game. We've seen Jake Paul and the impact he's had in boxing and the rise of influencer boxing. Patrice Evra was due to fight in the PFL, right? Everyone will remember him as a Manchester United legend. How do you feel about that trend, and is there anyone out there you think would just be a super fun signing for you?
Yes, but I'm not disclosing him today, so stay tuned. We have somebody that we're going to be announcing who I think is going to be is a big time influencer and an outstanding athlete and a great fighter. So we'll be making an announcement later. Look, I think all of this is good for the sport, and I really mean it. And I'm not just saying that, because what the MVP events on Netflix has showcased is they are addressing what I call the casual fans, meaning that, in the US, the Super Bowl gets these massive audience numbers. Not everybody watching the Super Bowl is a diehard football fan, but it's an event and people watch it. They may watch it for the advertisements because they're kind of famous, or because their friends are watching it and they all get together in groups of people and they throw parties, and it's a social event. In some respects, Netflix, being the largest video platform in the world, invites in casual fans to experiment, to try out fighting, and it should be more entertainment. I think for younger viewers, they're very, very much more interested in the social media content, the social media influencers, and fighting is primal. I think everybody at their heart, they want to go, hey, do you think that person can beat up that person? And they don't have to be professional fighters. There's always a curiosity around, hey, I don't know, like maybe that person could beat up that person, and they'll watch it. Or, I saw something actually, I think it was, I saw one boxing commentator that said, he was asking a few people, he goes, what's your favorite sport? What's your favorite sport? And then one person said basketball. One person said football, soccer. Another person said tennis. And then one person said MMA and boxing. He goes, okay, You're all wrong except the person that's at MMA boxing. And they were all looking like, what are you talking about? He goes, because pretend you're walking down the street and you see one pickup soccer game, football game. You see one pickup basketball game. You see two guys playing tennis. And all of a sudden you see two guys on the street corner fighting. Which are you going to watch? Because you're going to watch the fight because it's primal and it's immediate. And it's like, and it's like, he goes, that's going to grab the attention over every other sport every time. And that's what I love about the sport. And it could be entertainment. It's got to be entertainment. You know, these athletes, the athletes that we have, they're amazing individuals. They come from all walks of life. They all fight for different reasons. And I'm trying to get them to get their personalities and bring them to the surface more, because when you really sit down and talk to these people, they're fascinating. And I want the fans to get to know them in ways that we haven't been able to really present them yet.
That's what we're here to do. Exciting times for the industry, exciting times for the PFL. John Martin, it's been a pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you so much.